Hey, this is Brendan from Comic Con. My guest today is Buddy Beaudoin, the writer and letterer of Corvus number one. Corvus number one came out on September 25th. That was last Wednesday. It's put out by Dead Sky Publishing. Uh, Chris Sassman is doing the art and the main covers. Allison Hu is on color. Laura Helsby and Jason Wordy did the alternate cover for number one. I don't know if they're going to continue doing that for the subsequent issues. We'll find out in just a minute. Let's welcome Buddy. Buddy, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's just go. I'll just read the solicit real quick. It says, "When you stare into the stars at night, could you ever imagine what staring back could be so familiar? Aboard Corvus, you'll explore space, trauma, delicate interpersonal relationships, and quite often your own mind as a race of alien beings known as the Mare bring you to the brink of your consciousness and threaten to destroy Earth. Daryl Dahl is just a normal dude working at a video game store when his life gets turned upside down by some freaky looking aliens, a journey into his own subconscious, and an intergalactic grassroots paramilitary group. Just another day at GameSpace." That is a mouthful. Tell us about the book, sir.
Yeah, there's a lot to pull from there. It's a book kind of built on my trauma, a lot of my personal history, um, and just things that I love. So there you'll find a lot of reference to video games, a lot of reference to stuff like The Last Starfighter, um, and Alien, and all sorts of movies. I grew up next to a video rental store, so they're all just stuck in my head constantly. Yeah, I lost my father in my early 20s, and psychologically, it took me a long time to come to grips with that. And this book is kind of a response to what that had been like and kind of the healing through it. But set in space with fun aliens because it's more fun to read than my diary.
Right, more fun to read the diary. Yeah. No, so you said you grew up next to a video store, and there's, I read the first issue. There is a lot of that kind of like neighborhood video game store, neighborhood movie store kind of dynamic going on in there. Just where do these characters, do they come from people that you saw in the store, or kind of that dynamic that you witnessed, or where are you pulling these characters from?
Just kind of thin air. I just kind of sat down and wrote out kind of the intentions of what I'd like the characters to be, and they just developed from there. Darren is most closely associated to me as the one like experiencing the main story, and then everybody else around him is kind of there to kind of just guide him and shape his journey and share the bond of also having their own personal histories and traumas. Yeah, just familiarity, I guess.
Okay, and then in some of the quotes that you were doing for the lead up to this, you said before you wrote Corvus, you were writing mostly comedy stories, and they felt really shallow to you. So you really wanted to do something that's like super personal. You mentioned the death of your father. My condolences, by the way. I mean, that's pretty rough to deal with, especially in your early 20s. I know my grandparents passed away when I was in my 20s. They raised me, and that was a big hit because you're at this point where you're just kind of on the verge of adulthood, and the people who have been your rock for so long just kind of aren't there anymore. So you wrote this as a trauma response. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I've had since then, throughout my life, nightmares or just regular dreams of my dad that he's always kind of in different roles. It's been like a really interesting dynamic, and it's nothing at all like our actual interpersonal relationship. But yeah, this book is in some ways like a catalog of that. There's specific scenes in issue 3 that are pulled like exactly from my dreams and nightmares. And that's kind of the intention behind the villain, the mayor, is to kind of keep you in that headspace and make you relive those things, which is really just what depression and trauma and anxiety kind of are. So yeah, it's like in some ways being locked in your head, like that's your own worst enemy when it comes to processing a lot of heavy emotions.
Right on, right on. Okay, so I think I read somewhere that you had intended to do a book with Brennan Fremantle, but he was busy with something else, and so you ended up collaborating with Chris Sassman. Chris says, "I appreciate the authenticity and the emotional element that this book relies so heavily on, but also the zaniness." So, what's it like working with Chris, and just kind of like when you're looking at some of these creatures and some of the things that happen? I mean, there's a very specific kind of visual. Like design language that you guys are going for here. Was that Chris's work? Was that you? Like, how hands-on were you with that? And then where did he take it after you gave him what you thought this was going to be?
Yeah, visually, most of the stuff has just been Chris. I like to give people kind of the freedom to like interpret the story and the art. To me, I think that's probably more fun for them. But Chris and I will sit down once I'm done drafting a script, and we'll go through the script and we'll pick it apart, find things that he wants to add, or things that he wants to add like a personal touch to.
Mhm,
And I like letting him do that. I think it adds to the story in a ton of ways. So there are a lot of things in the character design and character development um, that were Chris's ideas that I, was happy to work into the story. Um, and then kind of the relationship between he and Allison um, took off pretty quickly. That we worked through issue one, and they had never met, and they kind of like figured each other out. And then when issue two
mhm,
came forward, he was like, "All right, I'm not going to give Allison any notes. Like she gets it." I think
mhm,
his exact words were, "I'm just going to let her cook." Um, so yeah, working with Chris is great. He's got a lot of really interesting ideas. And I have kept him in the dark about a lot of story elements um, as we've gone through, just to kind of see his response to things as he's reading them without knowing everything
mhm.
firsthand. And I think that's lent to him adding a lot of personal flair to things. Um, and it's nice in a book that is so kind of deeply personal to have the artists integrated in that as well, because they get to tell parts of their own story in it. I think that's important.
We brought up actually a couple of things that I was going to get into is the relationship between the colorist and the artist, because Allison is also very excited to be on the book. She says the once in a lifetime confluence of passion, skill, and newfound friendship. I think that's great that she's just like, we're making this great thing and it's so much fun and we're getting along. But I think that a lot of times, the writer will get the credit or the artist will get the credit or the writer and the artist get the credit, but then you don't realize that. I mean, you come from a background as a letterer and now you're writing and also doing lettering on this book, but just that there's such a synergy that has to happen between the art and the color, that has to happen between the art and the script, that has to happen between the lettering and the right. So it's great that they're doing so well with it. But let's talk a little bit more about what Allison is bringing, because everybody's seen the things where it's like, I'm doing the color in this style or this style or this style, and you look at it and it's three different pictures, but they're all the same picture. So what kind of mood is Allison setting for the book?
Yeah, I think initially when we had started, my only kind of direction for color was, quote unquote 90s. I wanted the book to look like a little bit like 90s animation. Um, and I think that it does. They pulled that off easy enough.
Mhm,
Allison is great with her ideas because, um, yeah, first of all, she's very excited. She loves to jump into the scripts and see where things are headed. And she is a huge color nerd. So there are always like things where she'll go back and forth. She'll like send me a page and be like, okay, I did it this way. And then 10 minutes later, she'll be like, no, I needed to update this. It wasn't working for me. So she gets very into it. But she also has really, really cool ideas of her own that she adds. Like at one point, there's a race later on in the book that Chris was like, oh, I want them to have translucent skin. And just the way that she did that
ooh,
was, I wouldn't have been able to figure that out as a colorist. Like, how do you make that happen and look appropriate? Um, and then there are things later on, I think again in issue three, where it's like, without spoiling too much, there's an appearance of somebody's head is melting, and she colored it in a way where it all flows um, together, and she colored it to look like real life brain scans. So she like sat there and studied brain scans and like how that looks visually, and like that
Mhm.
influenced her coloring, and it's gorgeous. It's really cool to look at. So
Wow. That
she
actually
gets pretty heady into it.
that sounds really, really complicated, and that actually brings me back to a conversation I was having with Fanbase Press's Barbara Dillon about graphic medicine and how artists sit there and they will just amaze you with their medical knowledge and things. So like the different layers of translucency and like that melting face thing, that's got to be insanely difficult to color. I can't even imagine what that looks like.
Yeah, as a writer, I think it's one of those things you write and you're like, hopefully they figure that out. Because yeah, they did it with, as far as I know, without any trouble. They never seem
Mhm.
to balk at it. So
That's fantastic. So, one of the other things that you pointed out was that you are kind of keeping Chris in the dark about some key points down the line, and that made me think. You're talking about the collaboration between you and he, and the thing, or you and him, between him, yeah, between you and him, and just I'm just wondering if you had something planned down the line and he knew about it in advance, he would kind of be swayed to go that direction with some of the art, but that kind of sounds like you're leaving it open a little bit for some input if things kind of go a different direction with the art that you might change some things down the line. So you're kind of giving him a little bit of power that he doesn't even know he has in that situation.
yeah, that's how it's worked so far. And I just turned in issue 6 script, so he has everything now, and he can finally get to see how everything he's done ties together. And I don't keep him completely in the dark. I'm like, this is going to come back later. This is going to be a recurring
Hmm.
thing. Just so he knows that his designs are going to have to, you know, stay. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's been super rewarding to kind of just see what he takes from the script, the ideas that he puts into it. Um, you know, every time I turn in his script, he'll come back with pages of notes. Um, not not like I think this is bad, I think this is bad, I think this is bad, but just kind of like, well, what if this was in this direction? Would that make sense for the story? Would it make sense if I
Mm.
did this here? Because I have a really cool idea for how to, break these panels down. Again, for instance, issue 3. I keep coming back to that one because it's kind of like the most artistically kind of divergent issue.
Mm.
It's like a lot of MC Escher influence and a lot of stuff. The like main influence from that was the movie The Cell, so a lot of like Tarsum Singh influence on it.
Hmm.
And initially, when we had turned in that script, the editors were like, it doesn't feel like there's enough happening," and we were like, no, please trust that everything that's happening is going to be happening in the art. And then I had Chris kind of like draft up a handful of those pages, and we turned those in, and we were like, this is what it all is, and they were like,
Mm.
oh, okay. Um, so yeah, glad we pushed for that, because I think that even though it's the art direction in the script is pretty minimal, the art is very heavy.
That's an interesting part of the process too that a lot of people don't realize what happened is when you turn the things in, you get all these different people telling you that they need this or they need that or whatever, and sometimes you really do have to sit there and fight for the things that are important for you, because there are books that are out there that just you sit there and you start reading, and then there'll be no words for 5 or 6 pages, but the art just completely carries you through the thing, and you know exactly what's going on without a word being on any of the pages.
Yeah, and that's a really hard thing to do, and that's a really hard thing to convince an editor of when they don't have any of the visual information. They only have the information as it's on the script, and if that is very little, then it doesn't give them much to go off of or, feel grounded in.
So back to the serious versus the silliness that's in the thing. I read the first chapter, like I said, and I mean there are just so many parts of the story where just like, oh yeah, I remember that about the video store or about the game store or whatever, or just funny little pop culture references from that kind of culture. And then there's this really really serious thing that's happening in the midst of everything, but you still get these little jokes here and there. So how do you find the balance between the seriousness of the subject matter versus getting those jokes in so that people have a good time while they're there?
I think my favorite thing to do is kind of just write things from a human element, right? So it's,
Mhm.
there may be a lot of craziness going on, but, in my own life, that's where my comedy comes into play is when things aren't at their best. It's a coping
Mm.
mechanism to when things are on fire to kind of let yourself breathe a little bit or to bring the tone up. Um, So yeah, I think in that way I write the characters' reactions kind of in the way that I think I would react to situations. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, things are scary. There's a lot going on, but sometimes you have to like find the humor in it. And also in the first issue, Darren really has no idea what is happening or what is about to happen. So
Mhm.
everything is jarring to him, and I tried to make the dialogue fit that he has no idea what's going on, and then that comes into play in issue 2, like the beginning of issue 2. He's like, what was any of that? um
Mhm.
and that's where more of the backstory comes in. Issue 1, I really wanted it to be like, we're just going to take off, and then you got to stick with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, which i
Well, and
i
it
think
it does
I
take
hope
off.
it does.
It does
Oh,
take off right out of the gate, and it's one of those situations where it's like, "And I bet you're wondering how I got in this situation." It's just like, "I know that. I know that from every, like, '80s show, from every" like, "Here
yeah.
I am. Oh, that guy right there underneath the semi truck, that's me. I bet you're wondering." Yeah, it's one of those little tongue in cheek, like, intros that gives you the exposition, and you're getting heavy exposition, but then all of a sudden it's like, "Okay, so now let's go back to the beginning and tell the story because now you have the information that you need," or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of that is like still grounded in reality. Like when there's an alien invasion, in my head, I'm like, well, we don't have like an early warning system for an alien invasion,
Mhm.
so if it happens, I think it's just going to happen. Um, and that's kind of where the story, after that first batch of pages,
Mhm.
kicks off. Is like things just go, and they have to figure everything out on the fly, and especially Darren, who is just kind
Mhm.
of, yeah, dude working at a video game store, who
Mhm.
has no
Well,
idea
what
what's
does what
happening.
does he say? What does he say about himself? "I was just a fucking nerd like you." Is that what it said?
Yeah, yeah, he was just, yeah, a dude working in a video game store that is just, his brain is full of pop culture references, and that's about it. And then all of a sudden, aliens show up, and he's dragged away on a ship to go fight them.
Mhm.
Um, which is like, I've said it before, is my kind of like interpretation of what I think Last Starfighter might have really been like. Like in that
Mhm.
movie, that they come and they're like, "Oh my god, you're so good at this video game. Uh, come help us fight aliens." And everything's like, "Oh, this
Right.
is so cool." But like in real life, you'd be like, "What? What? No, I'm not doing that."
Well, it's funny though because there's also a level of reality to that too. Because my kid just got out of the army, and when he was in basic training for engineer school, it's one of the things they asked him is who's really good at video games, so they could figure out who were going to be the drone pilots for clearing minefields,
Yeah.
running the things across. So like stuff like that does happen in real life, and I think it's one of those things like the Tiffany problem, where it sounds so far fetched that you don't think that somebody in the 1800s could be named Tiffany, but there were a ton of them. And it's like they do really like test you on video games. They did that for my driver's license before I could drive a Hemet when I was in the army. That stuff really does occur, and that really is a real world consideration on who's going to be the guy with the joystick.
Yeah, joysticks were military before they were in video games.
Mhm.
And yeah, they're using Xbox controllers to fly drones and pilot submarines and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I think there's definitely a consideration for that kind of thing.
Well, I think we just about covered everything without giving away too many spoilers. So, Corvus #1 is on the shelves now. It came out September 25th from Dead Sky Publishing. This is Buddy Beaudoin, the writer-letterer. He worked with Chris Sassman, the artist and main cover artist. Allison Hu is doing the colors, and at least on issue #1, Laura Helsby and Jason Wordie did the alternate cover. Thank you very much for your time today. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.